very, very special guest, a very good friend of mine. We've known each other for, I think it might even be close to 10 years at this point. But we are in the cannabis industry. I have the founder of Aunt Zelda's, Mara Gordon. Mara, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Seibo. I'm very happy to be here.
Me too. Me too. And for those that don't know, Mara, I don't know if you know this, but I do very much look up to you. You are one of the people in the cannabis industry when I think about my time in the cannabis industry, who I built good relationships with, who added value into my life, and um, who did I encounter that made me like a better person. And you are definitely one of the people. So I'm super happy to have you on the show. And just for our audience, I said that you were the founder of Aunt Zelda's, but do you mind just giving us like the origin story of Aunt Zelda's, how you even got into the cannabis industry, and then we'll kick it off from there.
Okay, great. So, my background is a process engineer, very methodical, very organized, very, one of my specializations is looking for patterns and pattern recognition. And, a long story that got me to first be looking at cannabis as a potential, pharmaceutical, or opposite of a pharmaceutical, but a potential solution for pain management for somebody else led me to see the potential of cannabis. So I went to a doctor and did all the things you're supposed to do, got a legal recommendation from the doctor. And the doctor's advice to me was to go to a dispensary and ask the kid at the counter what I should use. And I thought, you've got to be kidding. I'm going to go and ask medical advice from some kid that last week was working at a tattoo parlor and now they're working at a dispensary. I mean, it was like, it made no sense to me. So, but I did do what they said, or what the doctor had said, and the advice I got was horrific. And of course, I mean, I've given a whole TED talk about that advice, but so I thought, well, I have to figure this out for myself. So I started, experimenting with making some infused oil and testing it and dosing against different protocols and different medical problems that people were having, and found that I could collect the data on this and do a fairly good job of predicting what was going to work and what wasn't, treating different diseases. Um, so I started making my Aunt Zelda's carrot cake, because carrot cake is it's an oily cake. It contains a lot of oil. And since I was making infused oil, I could put it in the cake, I can weigh it, I can measure each piece to see approximately how much oil was in each piece for dosing. Because this was before there was any lab testing. This was like 15 years ago. And so that was how Aunt Zelda's was born. It was always an R&D company. It was always designed for treating the patients, getting the data. Obviously, we evolved away from carrot cake, but the name was already enshrined. And so we stayed with it. And from there, I started a biopharma company that's now called Therapeutics, where we test preclinical and clinical trials on products for different diseases, and then built a software platform to support all the data.
Yeah, and I remember Aunt Zelda's had some really healing oil that came in a syringe. Was that a version of RSO, or was that something you developed yourself in house?
Well, I hate the word RSO. It makes me cringe. I have written entire articles about why we should just eliminate RSO from the vernacular, because Rick Simpson has absolutely nothing to do with the oil that 99% of is being made and sold in the world today. Extracts, ethanol extracted oils have been made for thousands and thousands of years. So I did an extraction with ethanol. If you want to look back to the Rick Simpson thing, you're talking about paint thinner in a bucket with a 2x4 and using a rice cooker to burn off the paint thinner, the naphtha. That has nothing to do with medicine. So I really wish that people would just start calling it extract. But to answer your question, yes, I did make very, very good extract. I still have some, and I still make it for ourselves. I just no longer am participating in the fiasco known as the legal cannabis space in California.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was gonna ask you, a lot of the people that watch this show, they they wanna get into the cannabis industry in some capacity. You and I have been in the industry for quite some time, so you obviously have a breadth of knowledge. For someone that's just starting to get in, you had mentioned you're no longer in California. What
right.
should someone who is new wanting to get into the industry, what should be top of mind for them?
So that's a very good question and an almost impossible one to answer. For example, I don't consider myself in the cannabis industry. I consider myself in the healthcare industry.
Mm,
Cannabis happens to be one of the primary tools within the practice that we work with. What I would tell anybody that wants to get into cannabis, almost anything that you're doing out there in the rest of the world can apply to cannabis. If you're an accountant, they need accountants. If you're a marketer, they need marketers. If you're a chemist, they need chemists. Almost anything that you're doing already can be applied to cannabis. I think that you need to make a commitment, though, to what your ideals and goals are before you just go into it, because it's too easy to get distracted by shiny objects. How many times did you and I watch, this week they're doing a vaporizer, next week they're doing this, and then they're doing that. It's like no real consistency and focus. And I think that if people would understand why they want to get into cannabis, like why, what is it about cannabis that you want to get into? Well, I want to help people. Okay. Look at the subset of skills within that allow you to directly interact with patients or with users. You just want to make a lot of money and go to a lot of parties, then go on the strictly recreational side and hook up with some of the multi-state operators that really don't seem to care very much about the patient.
yeah. And you made a reference to the California cannabis market being a mess. I have experienced that, and I think if it had not been for the love of cannabis, I would have pulled the ripcord on the parachute many more years before I actually did.
Right.
And for some reason or another, well, we'll get into that a little bit later, but there was some divine guidance for me to get back in. And you had just intimated that you don't consider yourself in the cannabis industry, but in the healthcare industry now.
Right.
What was that transition and kind of ideology? And yeah, I'm kind of curious to hear more about that.
I've always been in the healthcare industry. I've never been in the cannabis industry. That's not a new evolved way of thinking. That,
Ah,
that is simply the way I have approached it. Because let's look at what I do, Seibo. I teach doctors, I train doctors, right? I help with patients to set up dosing protocols to treat their various diseases. In my case, I primarily focus on cancer. Um, I help them in some cases locate appropriate products the same way as if you would write a prescription. What am I doing that doesn't reek of healthcare that reeks of cannabis? So I also talk to them about, agarikon mushrooms. I talk to them about sulforaphane. I talk to them about curcumin, all sorts of things. Cannabis is one of the tools in the toolbox, but it's not the whole toolbox. And I think that it's important that I have a perspective that even when I speak to a patient that is coming to me to talk completely about cannabis, it may be that there's other things that are just as helpful for that patient. So that's why. If everything you see was that they say to a hammer, everything's a nail. If I saw myself strictly in the cannabis industry, then everything would be solved with cannabis in by my way of thinking. The same way that if a doctor describes himself as a cannabis doctor, I don't want anything to do with that. I want to go to a doctor that is conscientious enough to take into account all the various potential treatments for whatever it is that the disease is.
yeah. That's interesting. And all the time that we've known each other, I didn't know that was your philosophy. So it's really cool to be able to learn things about people that you've had so many conversations with, and all of a
Right.
sudden, because we're in this format, new information comes out. Now, I'm curious, what do people come to you for? What are the most common cases and ailments that people are suffering from where they seek out Mara Gordon?
Cancer. I mean, I have personally worked with close to 10,000 cancer patients. And this was the case even before the people came out, when people all saw me treating pediatric cancer. But I would say, and it's a lot of it's word of mouth. I mean, I don't promote, I don't self promote, I don't advertise, I don't have a marketing, I don't have somebody doing my social media. I'm none of that. It's all word of mouth and organic. This person heard from this person and then they contact me or whatever. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I think that's why we're talking is you're spending your time helping people, not promoting yourself. And then
right.
people like me can help promote you that know
There
what you're
you
really
go.
doing.
Right.
Yeah.
There you go.
So, I wasn't planning on focusing on cancer, but my father did pass away from cancer in 2020. And I think one of the things I loved what you said was like, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And there was a time when I realized anytime someone came to me with a problem, stress at home, aches in their body, can't sleep, can't eat, whatever. I'm like, cannabis, cannabis, like I was like a one trick pony, so I kind of realized that. And yeah, I do believe cannabis is quite broad in like what it could help with. But, sometimes you need a screwdriver, sometimes you need a saw, sometimes you need a hammer, right? And
Exactly.
so one of the things about cancer and cannabis is and I wanted to focus on this with you now that I understand, like, where the vast majority of your clients are, is what is treatable? What types of cancer, what stages are treatable with cannabis and what isn't?
Boy, is that a good question. So one of the things to keep in mind is that there are over 200 different types of cancer. And these cancers have all their own genetic anomalies, subsets of conditions and whatnot. So just because two people have the same diagnostic code of an ICD-10 code for their type of cancer does not mean that they're both going to respond the same way or anything else. The same way that you can have five people that have HER2 positive breast cancer and they go on leptinib, and for one of them it works and one of them it doesn't. There's just no way to know for sure. We do know, though, we do know where the cannabinoid receptors are within the body, and so what we're targeting with that. Um, and we don't know for a fact, but we suspect that there is a dearth of receptors in the brainstem. The problem is we need to get a brainstem to do an analysis on biopsy, but you can't because it's the brainstem, which controls all your lizard brain. Having said that, I have never had a case of DIPG which is a type of brain tumor that's in the pons and glioma that has responded to cannabis. Now, one of the things that I do with patients is I give them a list of their objectives, because anti-tumoral is only one of the objectives. Some of the people want side effects of chemo. Some people aches and pains. Some people to replace prescription medication. Some people, just can't sleep or they're anxious or whatever. So if we measure success against each one of these objectives, it helps people to feel more empowered and also to break down what it is exactly is their reason for adding cannabis to their regimen.
Yeah, I could see the process engineer and you coming out as you're describing this. And, so what I heard was it depends. There's a lot of different types of cancer. There's a lot of different ways that people either benefit or maybe some of the treatments aren't as effective for them.
Right.
So, as someone that's helping physicians and helping patients, when things are there's so many variables, um, what is the best way to determine, what would work for you? Is it just kind of trial and error, or, how would someone figure out the right regiment to be on?
So because we've seen so many people and I work with doctors and people they see that I get the data on as well, we're able to see patterns of what has been working and what hasn't. So one of the really important pieces of data I believe that we have that we have identified is that there is zero correlation between the weight of the patient and the dose of the patient.
Wow.
Okay. So standard pharmaceuticals are dosed at milligrams per kilogram. With cannabinoid based medicines, it's more to do with the age of the patient than and this is a generalization, but it has more to do with the age of the patient. You might have somebody who's 5 years old with cancer who could be on hundreds of milligrams a day higher than somebody who's 60 that has the same diagnosis.
Mhm.
And as a result, you set up a protocol differently for them and you titrate them differently. It's a lot easier to titrate children than it is adults, but uh, you really have to start out looking at some of the research. Like, for example, is this a CB1 or CB2 receptor are going to be most prevalent at the tumoral site? So that makes a difference. Is there potential ID1 genetic involvement in the type of cancer, which may change the ratios on some of the cannabinoids that you use? I mean, there's a lot of science behind it, and then there's a lot of trial and error, just like all medicine. Just like
Mm.
all medicine. Anybody who's ever been on an antidepressant or on a thyroid medicine or a hormone replacement that can tell you they're all over the place before they find one that works for them and the correct dose. It's not all medicine is bespoke medicine. Doctors just don't panic over it because they've got a little book that says, okay, first you do this. And if this doesn't work, then you do this. And then if that doesn't work, they don't have that with cannabis. So there's that lack of ease because their hands are not being held about a whole plant medicine that contains hundreds of compounds.
Yeah. Got it. Got it. So what it sounds like to me is cannabis therapy is no different than any other therapy. There's kind of like a trial and error, but then there's this other medicines have standardization, which gives us this illusion that these things are standardized, but in actuality, the way it's practiced requires some customization and trial and
Right.
error. Okay.
In addition, if somebody comes to me and they're 35 years old and they have triple negative breast cancer, I'm going to know that I want to start them out on a total cannabinoid of X number of milligrams, let's say 300 or 350 milligrams. And then the way that is divvied up between various cannabinoids, whether it's a dominant THC or a dominant CBD or CBN or THCA or whatever it is, will be dependent on at that point on the specifics to that particular individual, what medications they're taking, what treatments they're going through. Are they going through chemotherapy or are they not? Are they, on a steroid or are they not? I mean, there's a lot of different things that we have to take into account. So uh, there's a lot of people that are hanging their shingles and calling themselves cannabis experts. And I find it kind of scary. Most of them have not spent 5,000 hours treating anybody. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm like
Or
myself an expert. I just say, I've been doing it a long time, working with a lot of people. Yeah.
yeah, and you mentioned earlier that it's much easier to dose and titrate children versus adults. Why is that?
Children do not panic when they feel something. This is really more about adults, especially women, and I have had, without an exception, I've had so many women agree with me. So I'm not being prejudicial. Plus, I am one. Um, Women have this need for control. Especially younger women that are raising their families, that are driving the carpool and making it to soccer and getting dinner on the table and doing all these things and working and all this. It's like control, control, control. And I'm going to give you something that's going to allow your mind to expand, cause you to feel a little giggly. And how's that going to work? Right. So with a child, they don't know that that's not normal. They don't know that just being silly and feeling fine and watching they don't have any preconceived fears of it. And if we think of fear being false evidence appearing real, you have adults that are afraid of having this feeling when this feeling is nothing more than allowing you to be free from some of the suffering that you're experiencing. Um, and I think that that is just super hard for a lot of people to let go. I remember years ago, I had a patient's wife call me and she was freaking out like, oh my God, my husband, he won't stop giggling. Won't stop laughing. And I'm like, okay, get to the bad part, you know? I mean, he had stage 4 prostate cancer with Mets to his femur, to his lung. I mean, he was a mess. He was suffering terribly. And I'm like, when does it get bad? And she's like, well, it's just not normal. And I'm like, right, it's not normal. Let's see if we can make this his new normal. And
Yeah.
in Western medicine, there's such a culture of suffering where unless you feel bad from the medicine, it's not doing anything. Well, all medicine doesn't have to make you feel badly. Medicine can make you feel well as well. Yeah.
Yeah. It almost seems counter-logical to me to think that taking a medicine, I should feel a little bit worse before I start feeling better. Um, how do you think this mentality even came to be? I'm trying to connect it to something, and I know that when I was younger, my father or my uncles would always tell me, like the more that you could take, the stronger you will be, so that's probably the closest that I could equate. But when it
Yeah.
came to medicine, um, I never transferred that kind of thought of
Right.
like, yeah, the harder I grind, the more it'll pay off. But yeah, where do you think that came from?
I think it came from the church. I think it came from suffer and ye who will inherit, blah, blah, blah. I think it came from this dogma and doctrine of suffering on earth for rewards later. I think that there's this thing that I show at conferences where it shows, 2000 BC, you have an earache. They said, here, eat this root. And then that was considered pagan. So then they said, okay, don't eat the root. Drink this elixir. Oh no, and going on through time, and then it was like, take this antibiotic, drink, and now it's like, no, that's no good. And we're back to take this route. So we've kind of gone full circle in medicine. And there definitely is, for example, in Western culture, nobody talks about diet. Nobody talks about food and the fact that our food is our first medicine that we put in our body. Everything that you put in your body is medicine. And we completely don't talk about that at all. In fact, you go to your average chemotherapy room at a hospital, and in the snack closet, it's got Oreos and ocean spray cranberry juice and all this crap that is like the antithesis of what a cancer patient should be putting into their body. So I think that it's a lot of it's from, suffering small children, or whatever the quote is, that just it's absurd because you look at Eastern medicine and you look at, it Ayurvedic and other medicines where it's okay to feel good. It's all right. It's not a problem as much as it is in the West with allopathic medicine.
Wow. Wow. I feel like you mentioning the church is a great segue to talk about the spirituality part of this podcast. And what's interesting about this is I was a little bit nervous to talk about my spirituality with you because I think we are a lot of what we spoke about was like business and the science of cannabis. So I very much and knowing that you're a process engineer, like I I created this story in my head that Omara is an atheist. I knew that you were Jewish, but I thought, okay, maybe she's just so into like the academics and the science that there was a disconnection to spirit. And in many ways, I had that, like my dogmatic beliefs were like science will prove everything. And because of my dogmatic beliefs in science, it really prevented me from seeing like more or
Right.
experiencing more.
Right.
And so I wanted to ask you, like, this was a recent discovery for me about you when we had our last talk, 4 or 5 months ago. But did you always have this side to you that had some spiritual leanings, or was that something that developed later in your life like it developed later for me?
I've always had it. Always. I remember being a little girl. I mean, probably 6 or 7 years old. And I remember I had green carpet in my bedroom. This was like the 1960s. And I had green carpet in my bedroom. And I remember sitting on the carpet and thinking, I wonder if we're all just a big experiment. And we're sitting here like the green was the carpet was like the earth, the grass. And we're just a big experiment. And there's, we're being watched and analyzed. I remember thinking that when I was a little girl. And I was raised very religious, extremely religious. Uh, they call Lubavitch. My father had the hat and the beard and the whole thing. And I went to yeshiva, which is like the Hebrew day schools, the schools that you go to. You aren't in public school, you're at this regular school. And I was always in trouble because I was questioning everything. Like, you say this and you tell me I should just believe this because you say it. But it wasn't questioning as if it exists. It was questioning, looking for an answer that wasn't condescending. It wasn't
Mm,
insulting that I just have to believe it because you said so. It's like that just isn't enough for me. I have to discover this for myself. So I started doing transcendental meditation back in the very early 1970s. I've been at a lot of things, a lot of searching over the years and throughout my lifetime. I mean, I'm almost 66 now. And I feel like I'm in a really good place with where I am. And I think that it took me giving myself permission to let go of some of the vocabulary around religion and realize that my spirituality has absolutely nothing to do with the religion. It has nothing to do with anything man-made. Now nobody can, if you can put a description on it and you can put it in a box, then that's not about me. That's about you. So
mm.
that individual, that specialized. I saw something the other day and I took a screenshot of it and I saved it because it was so spot on. Um, so who Sadhguru is, right? I'm
I
sure.
do. Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, I just think he's amazing. I don't agree with everything he says, but I love the way he says it and he owns what he says. He said, whether you say God is everywhere or you say everything is one energy, it's the same reality expressed in different ways. And
Mm,
the key is, I grew up being told that God was everywhere. And that felt like, uh-oh, you know, God is everywhere. Because in Judaism, you have a one-on-one relationship with God. It's not like in Christianity where you go through a priest who goes through this and that, and it's a hierarchy. In Judaism, it's a very one-on-one relationship. Rabbi just means teacher, not a, you know, they're not spiritual heads. Anyway, so, so with it being that way, I didn't want to just have to be like, this is the way it is. It's everywhere. Everybody has the same relationship. Everybody, I had my own. And I wanted to be able to have my own relationship with whatever this higher power is, this universal energy, which is really the way I see it.
yeah. Yeah, I love that, and, you had recommended that I watch this rabbi that was teaching the Kabbalah,
Yeah.
and, it was so interesting. It was so interesting. I started doing some more research, um, and I had read somewhere that they don't recommend if you're under the age of 40 to read the.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. And is it because the mind needs, like, more life experience to really take in that information?
Yes. You know, I remember, yes, that's exactly right. So I remember when I was in university, I was in a philosophy class, and I was in my 20s. I went back to school. My first husband had died, and I went back to school after, and so I was a few years older than most of the students in the class. And I was just mind blown by how strong the opinions were of the students in the class, how set in stone their opinions were, until I got to realize that they didn't have a single original opinion about them among them. They had their mother's opinion, their father's opinion, their teacher's opinion, their pastor's opinion, whatever, but they had not yet gone through the process of self-examination and deciding for themselves. Unfortunately, many people never go through this process. But the thinking is that until you're 40, you probably are inheriting more of what you believe than what you actually have gleaned for yourself.
Yeah. And do you still practice Judaism today, or are you more kind of like a open, free form spiritual practice and a personal connection to source energy?
I would say yes,
Yes.
because
Okay.
because I'm culturally Jewish. I mean, it's who I am to my core. I will go to 23andMe and it shows 100% Jewish. I mean, I know my family back to the 1400s, and technically I know back to Moses because my father was a Levite. That was the first Levite, was Moses. So I can't, being Jewish is not something that you can stop being. It's like I could go and decided that I'm going to become a Catholic nun and I'm going to be a Jewish woman who's a Catholic nun. I mean, it's not this, you can't get rid of it. It is my culture. It's my way of socializing with the world and the way that I learn to learn. It's a very different method of learning that we have in Judaism than in, Socratic and standard learning. Um, However, my approach to it has always been individual. It's always been my own way. So, like, for example, on Friday afternoons at sundown, when the Sabbath starts, I turn off all my electronics. I don't do that because I'm observing the Sabbath and I have, all the do's and don'ts, and you have to do this and you can't. I'm doing that because it makes sense to do that. Even the slaves got a day off, and it was because their owners saw that they were more productive when they had time. So I do that. If it's one of the holidays, I light the menorah? I did that with my daughter when she was growing up. My grandkids do it. So it's the traditions of it. However, there's 613 do's and don'ts, and there's, except for the ones that make sense to me, I don't do them. You know,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
You,
because
you know,
that's not
so
spirituality. About religion isn't about spirituality. Religion is about crowd management. Yeah.
I appreciate that, that outlook on it. In many ways, I do believe that it is the latter of what you said, and at the same time, I could see that many people extrapolate value from it. So,
Yes.
and I feel like that's a lot of things. Like you kind of get what you put into it is what you get out of it,
Absolutely.
and yeah, and when I was growing up, we grew up Buddhist, and what I saw was there were other Buddhist people that had done some pretty, I would say underhanded business tactics with my mother, and my mother lost a lot because of her faith. Then I grew up going to Catholic school, even though I was Buddhist, but my mom just thought it would be better that, I had some sort of disciplinarian type of academic school to go to. And all I saw there was a bunch of, you should do this while we go do whatever we want to do. So there was a lot of this, like, kind of, um, you know, it just, even though I was a young kid, it just didn't seem right to me to observe this. So early on, what I had a belief system that religion equals something bad under the guise of something good. Now, the flip side is as I've gotten older, I've been able to see, just like cannabis, there's good to it and there's bad to it. Let's
Yes.
not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Now, one of the things that was very, very interesting to me was as I was studying the Kabbalah is that, and am I pronouncing it correctly? I feel
Yeah.
like I'm
Yeah.
not pronouncing.
Kabbalah.
Okay,
Yeah.
Kabbalah. Okay. Um, is that there's no concept of heaven and hell.
No. Jews don't have heaven and hell. Jews don't have any of that. No, I mean, those are all, when people say Judeo Christian, leave off the Judeo because we have nothing to do with that. It's all Christian. Yeah, we don't
Okay.
have that. We don't have heaven and hell. If anything, we kind of have reincarnation, in its own form, more than anything. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say that belief is not unique to me because when I found that out, I would ask everybody, I was like, hey, did you know? I would say, what's the difference
Right.
between Catholicism, Christianity, and Judaism? And they would say, well, Jews don't believe Jesus is the son of God, but they kind of think like outside of that, there's a lot of similarities. And then now I would say, did you know that they don't have heaven and hell?
Right.
Everyone's like mind is blown. And
Right.
so I started seeing a lot of overlap with the Kabbalah, with what I knew of Hinduism, what I know of quantum physics, and just kind of seeing like a lot of this, like what I believe to be the same message with different languaging, like you had talked about earlier. And I guess I'm not too sure if I have a question here or I'm just like stating what I learned to you. But yeah, let me just kind of take a break there and see what you think.
Yeah, I love that. So the hypocrisy of the people that say "do as I say and not as I do" is I think what you were describing in your childhood with these teachers and whatnot and influences. So I do want to back up a little bit on what I said on religion because it sounds like I'm saying all religion is bad, and I'm not even remotely saying that. And when I say that about crowd control, if you think back to Judaism, when did Judaism become like the what the religion was formed around? It was when the Jewish people who had been enslaved for hundreds of years all of a sudden found themselves out in the desert. They had been slaves. They didn't know how to do anything. Slaves have everything done for them. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but they don't have to worry about, when they're going to eat, how they're going to eat, where they're going to live. Everything is kind of like with a boss man. And when you come out with all these rules on don't eat pork, well, at the time, pork had trichinosis, all the problems with it. Don't eat shellfish. There's a lot of problems with shellfish. There's a lot of the dietary things can be traced. Somebody who's uber religious on the Jewish side would argue with me that I'm wrong. But the reality is they make a lot of sense. There's a lot of sensibility among these 613 do's and don'ts. I think, though, that we've evolved as a people and our thinking and making our own decisions. And with that, we should be able to evolve. And of course, in Judaism, I think you then saw the conservative movement and then the reform movement in Judaism. And like on Yom Kippur, which we just had, a few weeks back, which is our holiest day of the year. That's the Day of Atonement. That's the day that supposedly it's written in the book who's going to live and who's going to die in the coming year. And we're fasting for 27 hours and all that. So got a proposal to go with that. Okay. So I went to, it's like the night before is called Kol Nidre, and it's like a chant calling everybody to prayer. And I went to the Chabad here, which is a super religious, it's Hasidic, where I was raised. And I was listening to it, and I was listening to the rabbi give a sermon, afterwards. And then I was kind of left. And then I came home and I looked on YouTube that there's called Central Synagogue that's in New York. And they broadcast their services, and they have this wonderful female rabbi and choir. And she was so good that I stayed home in front of YouTube on the second day or on the actual day, watching and listening to her because it was engaged with the world. it was the reality that we're existing in a world where not everybody thinks like us, not everybody's like us. We have to be able to be open to differences. And, yes, it's great to tell me about the lamb and the this and the that and that whole Bible story because it's a story. Or you can give me something practical, the fact that we have hostages being held and, trying to kill us all over the world and free pally crap and all that. It's just, I want to hear somebody who's going to use their platform as a spiritual leader, a religious leader in this case, to help to create a some calm and also some peace and some sense of purpose in how we move forward in a very unfair world.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish for the same too, for leaders to call for more unity instead of using more fear and divisiveness
Right.
to mobilize whatever it is that they're trying to mobilize. And, you had talked about, or we had both agreed, California cannabis was quite challenging. And what I've found over the last 3.5, going on 4 years now of really prioritizing my connection to source, my connection to the universe, it's really helped me, I would say, not just reframe the situations that I've been in, but really kind of allow me to show up in a different way, different type of energy, more of this unitive energy versus like I just need to get whatever I need to get done energy that I believe I was operating on before. And I was curious, how you've been able to utilize your spiritual practices to help you navigate a very challenging career that you've had.
I think the very first thing and is that what other people think of me is none of my business. I don't care. I
Mm,
just don't care. And having that attitude, it's like if I am being the best person I can be and I am doing my best, I don't care if you think so because the universe is what matters. The universe will see my intention and will understand and okay, I'm gonna break this down into a way that may sound really hokey, but let's face it.
please do. Well, my audience is open to this,
So,
so and
so
I think coming from a process engineer, it makes it sound way less hokey. Coming from a guy like me that takes, like, dabs all day can sound a little hokey.
okay, all right. So let me think how to put it. Okay. I believe that I am an energy source. Okay. I'm an energy source and I live inside of a meat puppet. All right. And it's up to me to keep this meat puppet healthy so that I have somewhere to live, so that this energy source has somewhere to live within this consciousness.
Yep.
Okay. So that's the starting point. The next thing, the next layer of that for me is when I hear somebody else's opinion, it's an outside force that I have the right and responsibility to myself to look at it without prejudice and just analyze it and not take it as yes or not take it as no, but just to analyze it. And if it fits, great. If it doesn't, then let it go. I have taken that a step further, and even in my own thoughts, when I have thoughts, which is all the time,
Right.
I have thoughts because I happen to have one of those brain too active. I have the I have the responsibility and the right to put a layer between me and the thought because the thought is an opinion in most cases. Like, even if it's something like, oh, if the word need is in it, it's out. It's like,
Mm,
I have a thought like, oh, I need to this or I need this. No. I'm judging myself. I'm saying I somehow lack, you know? And because I'm the energy, I'm perfect. Because energy is, it doesn't add, it doesn't subtract, it just is. It's what
yeah.
I'm out to be in this outer packet, right? So I'll think of it and I'll say, thank you very much. Or like, oh gosh, I really need to go think, okay, thank you for that thought. I'll catalog it, not coming in right now. And it's a freedom to not get all neurotic and not get all analysis to paralysis and all the things that those of us who have active minds have a tendency to do. Because I'm fine. I am just fine. I'm a part of all the molecules of the world. And so every Friday night when I light candles, which I do to set Sabbath, I'll light those candles. The first thing I do is after a walk few minutes, I cover my eyes and I thank the universe for all the incredible gifts in my life and all the beautiful people that I have the opportunity to whatever. And then while I'm still engaged, I open up and I ask the universe to show me the next right thing to do. Allow me to see, and then I ask to make my path gentle so that I can learn my lessons easily and move on,
Mm.
be a bigger source of inspiration to others to help the earth, to help the world. So that's just kind of the way I do it. And um, it doesn't mean that I'm a nice person. I mean, I'm not a not nice person, but it doesn't mean that I'm a, Pollyanna and everything's, hunky dory. I mean, I've got strong opinions about a lot of things, but I need to make sure that these are go through the treadmill of analytics before I allow them to become part of me or just something say, okay, I see that, I examine it and I let it go.
Yeah, wow, wow. I love all of that. I agreed with all of that. There was, like, this sensation in my body that was just saying, "Yes, yes, yes," to everything that you were saying, and, there's a lot to unpack there because, I wanted to interrupt several times because there was a lot of things that I really love. Maybe the first thing I loved is the meat vehicle that we're all operating. Our source energy is operating this meat vehicle. And when I think about like how movies like The Matrix or the Avatar really opens up people's minds to like what might be possible, right? Like we think
Right.
about, okay, we could create these avatars and maybe download our consciousness into that. And well, maybe that's actually what's happening right now. And I
Exactly.
believe what you said, we are an energy source. That energy source needs a vessel to express itself. So there's an energy source within Mara, within
Oh,
myself. And um and I think that what I really resonated with was how you finish that, which is you ask the universe like, "Hey, I can learn my lesson, but maybe you could teach it to me gently."
that's right.
And this is what I've noticed, Mara, is I've been a lifelong people pleaser, and people have always liked me as a people pleaser. And sometimes my people pleasing was altruistic, but one of the things that I noticed was sometimes I would think, "Oh, I'm getting taken advantage of here," or "How come this person's not reciprocating?" And then when I started having those thoughts, when I pulled myself out to just be an observer of my own thoughts, it was like, "Oh, this wasn't altruistic. I'm, like, keeping some sort of score in my head,
Yes.
I'm keeping some sort of score here, and what I had to learn through the people pleasing was how many times I would get screwed over until I realized people pleasing was not a good thing because I was showing up inauthentic, showing them a different version of myself, and they probably liked that version, and maybe that version, they thought like, "Yeah, he's looking out for himself, I'm looking out for himself." So when I had to make a decision about what was the best thing to do, I would just do what's best for me, and maybe Sabo would feel betrayed. And now I feel like because I've become aware of that, I've been much better at being able to say no. And what I noticed was the universe was basically showing me, like, very early on, people pleasing and expecting something in return isn't a good thing. And it took so many lessons for me to finally realize, oh, wow. It took me to the point of getting kicked out of my own company, And so since then, I started being able to recognize the little breadcrumbs a little bit sooner. So instead of DEFCON 5, it's like, okay, we got like a small little smoke signal here. Maybe if I just put it out, it'll be easy and I can learn my lesson. Or I could wait until the whole house is on fire and then I'll learn my lesson. It's up to you.
So we have this thing where we say, um, you can get, the universe will whisper in your ear. And if you don't pay attention, it'll tap you on the shoulder. And if you still don't pay attention, it'll hit you with a brick. Well, the goal is to hear the whisper in the ear and not have to get hit with a brick. So that's
Yeah.
kind of the bottom line on it. So I think one of the things to what you're talking about, I think that and that goes back to some of the other, do's and don'ts of most religion. We're told that if we do good for other things, then we're going to get rewarded somehow, that there's a paycheck at the end of every action in our lives, whether it's positive or negative, instead of just etzla, it just is to be.
Mhm.
And and in the way that I was raised, we looked at giving. There's charity is a huge part of my culture. If you look at lists of who the biggest philanthropists are in the world, it's like unbelievable how many of them are Jews compared to the percentage of the population. It's just outrageous how generous we are as a people. But there's different ways of giving, and I think that that is the key. At least for me, that's what it is. So you see people giving and they create this big giant check and they stand there up on a stage and they're like, "Oh, aren't I wonderful? I'm giving all this." And then you have the person who calls the person in and they give them that and "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you." And I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of in between. And then you have the person who, knows this family is hungry. So they go and set groceries up on their porch and then they hide and watch till the people come and get it. So then they can feel good about it. But the form of giving that I was encouraged always to give is that one where you just give and you don't see who gets, and you don't have anything to do. You don't have to get rewarded. So it's a step beyond putting the food on someone's porch and then running away. It's not even necessarily dealing with the identifying the person. Every time I see a picture online or a video online where somebody is like, "Oh, this guy, he was begging on the corners and we helped him get this and we helped him that. And isn't that great?" I think, what are you doing to that man? You're humiliating that human being. You're taking away their sense of self, their core. Allow them to be and have some dignity. And I think that we can apply that really to everything in our lives. What we do, like people will say to me, "How come you never post any case studies? How come you never post what's happening with your patients?" Like, first of all, it's none of my business to do that. It's their business if they want to do, not me. But I'm also not doing it so that I can get accolades or get self promotion in any way. It's just simply about being of service and allowing us to live a life in service. And when we do, all good things happen to us, because all good things that really matter, we can only sit on one chair at a time. We can only lay on one bed at a time. We don't need very much. And at the end of the day, you attain enlightenment. And what do you do the next day? You chop wood and carry water. I mean, you just have to go about living your life and it's not causing obstacles to other people and doing what you can to help them, but not in a showy way, not in an ego way. It's like getting the ego to let go. So I think what you were referring to with being of service, which is very codependent to always need to somehow have it reinforced, that's the ego. And as we get older, hopefully, and we have more experience, we are able to do maybe a little better job. Think of your children. When you and your wife would have an argument when they were little, they assumed it was about them. They caused it. Kids think that they're the center of the world. And as we grow, hopefully we're evolving away from that self-centered. At least that's the intention.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, there was another lots of information packed into a few minutes there. And so I'm trying to think about, like, where I wanna start my answer, but or my response, but I think one thing that stood out to me was, and a lot of people talk about manifestation and doing things for, like, a end result, and versus doing things for the sake of doing them, like, if you're helping someone, but the reason why you're helping them is so that you can post a photo on LinkedIn. It's like, well, who are you really helping there, right? And this is I hope no one confuses this with us telling don't help people. Absolutely
Not
help
at all.
people,
Yeah.
but just think a little bit more deeply as to the why. The why. What is the intention of the helping? And I do believe that as we get older, there is more awareness. Hopefully, we all become more aware of our intentions and really align our intentions with like the outcome of what we actually want versus, I could only speak for myself, but when I was running Vape Exhale, I was talking about empowering everyone and rising tides lift all boats. But in reality, I was just focused on keeping my company alive,
Mhm.
yet I would see myself saying all these things. And I wouldn't say that I was being phony, but there was a lack of awareness that like, oh no, actually I'm really just focused on surviving. And I think it's okay to say those things and be honest. And I would say maybe one of the biggest changes that I've made and when I'm coaching my founder clients is that your employees would appreciate you being vulnerable and being honest, and just letting them they're adults too, and adults don't need to be talked to like children, like, "Everything's great. We're gonna raise we have tons of money," and, just being real and honest, and I believe when we can be real and honest from a leadership perspective, then that gives permission to our employees to be real and honest too.
I agree with you. I think that that's very well put. I mean, how many people I go to these conferences. I don't go to really cannabis conferences that much. I do medical conferences and occasionally a medical cannabis conference or whatever. But people come out there and you ask them a question and their answer is so pat. It's such a pat answer. It's like, did you rehearse it and go over it with a marketing person before you answered this? Just speak. I mean, my God, just talk. Be human. Don't be, automaton. And, and I think that if people say, oh, that's one of the things I love about Laura. She just says what's on her mind. She just says that I say the truth. It's about speaking the truth. It's about not worrying about whether it's going to make a bigger sale or whether it's going to, but if it's the truth, identify it, speak it. And I think that what you just said that you were doing with your employees is you realized that you weren't just, and when you showed them that there really were problems or whatever, they're going to, and if you're authentic and you're sincere, they'll roll up their sleeves and do everything they can to help you. People
Yeah.
want to be neat. People don't want to be bullshitted.
Yeah. You know what? Something came back to me that you brought up earlier that I thought was very poignant, which was you were talking about like just being very open-minded and accepting of like, all the infinite possibilities of the universe, but at the same time having like a very strong opinion and very strong perspective. And to me, I feel like that very much encapsulates what I would like to see in the world, which is openness to however people are, but not at the expense of, like, who you are, Like, I feel like, a lot of the people that I know, especially in the spiritual side, they're so open to people doing whatever that they're doing that it almost becomes like, well, hey, in that person's culture, it's okay to do this dastardly thing. So who am I to judge? But it's like, well, obviously we have our own viewpoints and have opinions. And I believe that if you try to be everything to everyone and you lose yourself in the process, that
And
doesn't really
nothing.
help people. Yeah. So
Right.
really being able, I love, what you said about just being open to everything, but still having very strong opinions, I think to me is a great way to navigate the world.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be working for me. I would say I am a very happy person. I lead my life with joy. I look for joy and gratitude in everything. I'll give you an example. Um, so I live in Mexico now. We have these splits. They're like the air conditioners that go against the wall up at the ceiling, but they're also like fans and heater, whatever. Well, they have this huge like this big, bright light with the temperature on it. And it lights the whole room up because it's so bright. Every night, the last thing I do when it's already is I press the button on the remote that turns the light off and the whole room goes black. And I have such gratitude in that moment that the light is off and my room is dark so I can go to sleep. It seems like a silly thing, but it's every night that I'm in my house that I'm not trying. In hotel rooms, I do it too. Being able to identify the little tiny things in life that make our lives joyful and that make them great. I mean, the fact that I'm able to sit here and talk to you in my office on my computer is awesome. It's fantastic. I don't take it for granted. Each time I walk in here, I'm excited that I have the setup that I have, that I have the ability to work the way I do and communicate the way I do. So I heard Patti Smith in an interview one time talk about how she, lives in gratitude about the silliest thing. You know, I was on an airplane a couple weeks ago. I'm coming back from Brazil, and my carry on fit perfectly into a spot that I needed to. And I took the moment to have gratitude about the fact that my bag fit because it was easy, convenient, whatever. And I think that a lot of us feel these things, but we don't take the energy or the time to acknowledge and recognize what they are. We just move on to the next thing. Like, oh, that worked. But it's like taking that moment to be grateful. We need more. I think that people would be a lot happier if they did more of that because they would recognize how many things in our lives, are just wonderful. If we look at what the actual things are that make up our life is I'm hungry. I go to the refrigerator. There's food for me to eat. You
Yes.
know, that's life, you know?
Yeah, I read a study that said the number one indicator to someone living a joyful, purpose-driven life isn't how much they make, isn't how much they have or their asset portfolio. It's how much gratitude that they practice. And it makes total sense. When I thought about my friends from poorest to richest and then how happy they were, there was no correlation. When I thought about how happy they were and how much gratitude they practiced, 100% correlation. And I think that what you said is super important, whether it's like just getting the right Tetris shape to fit your luggage in,
Right.
or, going to your refrigerator and having food there. So much to be grateful for. And a woman that I interviewed like maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago, she asked me to do this thing that I consume cannabis. I started consuming cannabis because I just had no appetite and I needed to put on weight. So when I would consume cannabis, all of a sudden eating became like what to me interrupted my fun to like this thing that just made eating like the only thing that I could think about after I consumed cannabis. And so she challenged me. She said, Seibo, hey, what I want you to do tomorrow is when you get up, when you pick out your clothes, I want you to like imagine that was like the last time you were ever going to pick out your clothes. So just really be engaged with it. And you're brushing your teeth, just pretend everything is like your last meal, your last brushing your teeth, your last shower, and just engage all your senses while you're doing that and let me know how that is. And when I did that for the eating, I realized, oh, when I usually eat, I'm thinking about like a ton of different things that I need to do, and eating's getting in the way. But when I consume cannabis and I eat, I'm like locked in on the flavor, the aftertaste, the mouth sensations, the chew factor, just everything, and it really made when I practiced that day, it made everything that I realized there is joy in everything, and I get to choose how much joy I want to get out of it. And it really shifted my mentality to, oh, I need to do something to feel joyous to, no, I could find joy literally in every single thing. And we have a choice to do that. And so I love that that was, one of the things that you talked about. And since we are getting towards the end of the podcast, what I always like to open up or I'd like to close with, Mara, is what is most exciting for you and what do you want to communicate to the world?
Wow. What's most exciting for me, to me, and what do I want to communicate to the world? What I'm the most excited about is the fact that when two or more people get together, you have the possibility of endless creativity, unbelievable ideas that come from that. And there's no telling who you're going to get your ideas from or where you're going to get them from. So to be open at all time. I'm gosh, I spend my life so much focused on a scale of 1 to 10, what number am I? And I'm always looking to be the 10. So if something doesn't give me, 6, 7, or 8 or more, I figure out what is it about that thing that is not giving me joy, and is there a reason that I'm blocked to it, or is it something that I need to remove from my life? And so it's a great way to pick through things. Um, the big message for me is to not put what constitutes spirituality or joy or reason for being into the hands of anybody other than myself. And to, just nobody else gets to judge, you know? And when I judge me, I need to recognize that my thoughts are secondary to me. And so even with them, I get to do the same thing and say, you don't fit my joy meter. You just don't, I don't get to want to have that in my life. And that was a lot of what was happening with my business is I got to the point where I just didn't, I resented, and resentment is a feeling that I don't have any room for in my life. I started resenting board meetings. I started resenting having to deal with some things that I didn't want to deal with. And it's like, I can't live my life like that. I just can't do it. So I'm not really sure that I have any magical answer other than just that people should uh, take the time and energy to look inward and don't think you have to tell everybody about it. It's everything in life doesn't have to be witnessed from the outside. Some things can just stay inside of us and they don't have to have a third party witness to legitimize that. And I think most of us think that everything has to be legitimized, especially in an Instagram world. If you didn't photograph it, it didn't happen. I think that we need to go more to what happens on my inner self is mine, and I get to keep it that way, keep it for myself.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And, I'll reflect something back to you. I would say maybe you said a lot of things that really made me light up, but I would say maybe the thing that lit me up the most was when you talked about, in general, women having more control issues than men. And I started connecting that, really thought about all the women in my life and I was like, yeah, that is definitely true. That's not just some observation that might be a certain way in a certain area. It's like across the board, when I think about the women in my life, that's absolutely true. And then the other thing or connected to that is what I really love about the interview that we just did is you're so unapologetically you. And I feel like when you could speak your truth and not care about what other people think, because even if you do care about what other people think, you're not in their head. Sometimes a lot of the people that I thought were angry at me or didn't like me were like my biggest fans, And so I had noticed that as I'm not there yet, but I think I'm pretty far along of like, I'm just going to express myself and however people take it, they take it. It's been just this type of liberation and freedom that didn't come from me doing anything other than just trusting that what I'm saying, what I'm doing, my own intention, I know the truth and that's enough for me. And that's what I felt like, maybe you didn't say that outright, but that was a general essence that I was getting out of our conversation today with you. And that's what I wanted to reflect back to you.
Well, I appreciate that. I am definitely me, 100% me. And it's like, if somebody, like I said at the beginning, if somebody doesn't like me, that is totally their right. and I could care less. That's an opinion. That's somebody else's. So I hope that I'm a decent role model. I mean, to especially to people that are maybe repressed in a way with not a natural tendency to become leaders and to find their own truth. And not everybody's going to be a leader. Some people aren't meant to be leaders. When I met my husband, I mean, not to say he's not a leader, but when I met my husband, the thing that really almost made me reject him, but then made me stop and pay attention and realize that he was the best thing that was going to happen to me was he worked to live. And I always lived to work. And from him, I learned about what's really important and what to value. So that was a very good lesson for me a long time ago that I got.
I love wow, that's so awesome, and, I know we said I was gonna start winding this down, but that
Sorry.
story requires a little bit more time, is so I've been working on, like, bringing in information from outside of myself and being, like, a conduit for that information, and someone had asked me, "When am I gonna meet, like, the love of my life?" And then so I quieted my mind and I tried to receive an answer, and the answer that I got is that, well, A, is you need to love yourself unconditionally first, before looking for someone else to fill your love cup,
Right.
and the person that you do meet, they're not like someone with like love that's overflowing that should fill your love cup. They should be the person that reflects back to you so that you could love yourself even more and be more of a complete person without that person. And, when you described your husband's relationship to you and how he reflected back to you, like the difference in ideology to life and work, it really kind of like solidified that as like, no, that person, yes, of course I love my wife, but what I help my wife do is reflect back to her through my love, how awesome of a person she is so that she could love herself even more.
Right. Right. That's awesome. Yeah. My Stuart, who you've met, of course, my husband, he has said many times that his reason for being is to empower me to be whoever I want to be and do what I do, and I mean, how lucky am I? I mean, I'm like the luckiest person in the world to live in that kind of gratitude, to know that there's somebody who puts me up there and yet knows really how I am and still feels that way.
Yeah. Well, let's shout out to Stuart. And so, um, if people have someone with questions about cancer or just want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to find Mara Gordon? I know you're
So
not on Insta, but yeah, how can they get in contact with you?
I'm not, you can always send me an email at mara@auntzeldas.org. Just keep in mind that it's .org. I Aunt Zelda's website, which is auntzeldas.org, has a contact me on there that they can do. Um, I'm on LinkedIn. I have an Instagram account, but it's more for like the grandkids than business. It's not really my thing. So I think that's really the thing. Send me an email. That's really the best way, or just go to the website and send it through the contact sheet.
Beautiful. All right, everyone. So it's Mara at auntzeldas.org. I'll put the email in the show notes. And Mara, it was beautiful to be able to spend 90 minutes with you and catch up
Okay.
and co-create something because I do know that you are someone that works very hard, isn't really in it to get a lot of adulation, but I wanted to bring you on here because I know that the work you're doing is going to help a lot of people. So I really want to amplify your message. And then also just to catch up with an old friend. And you know what? One last thing is for 66, you look friggin' great. So if you guys, to me, it's like I want to, when I go to a doctor or chiropractor or wellness person, I want them to look healthy too. So
Right?
I
Right?
feel like you are not just telling people, you are living it. And I'm so happy that you were able to carve out some time and speak with me and my audience today.
My pleasure. Anytime. I'm happy to. And I hope the next time I'm in, where are you now? Next time I'm there,
Sacramento.
Sacramento, next time I'm in Sacramento area, that we have a chance to get together. I like that very much.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right, everyone. So that's the lovely Mara Gordon. We'll be back next week with another special guest. And if you like what you heard, go give her a follow, send her an email, comment on this podcast, and we'll be back next week with another episode.